Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Oh, we got to try it one more time. I know you have more energy than that. I saw you come in and you were bursting at the seams. We're going to try it one more time. Good evening. Good evening. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good evening. That's the energy we saw you coming in with. My name is George. I'm the program director here at the Commonwealth Club. On behalf of all of us, I want to thank you for coming down to tonight's
Okay. Sorry, we were just chatting back there, having a good
go.
time.
Whoa. Yeah. Wow. What a gang.
Well, and we have a number of people with us online. So welcome to today's program of the Commonwealth Club of California. Today, we have a very special treat from behind the scenes. George Dobbins, the Vice President for Programming at the Commonwealth Club, who oversees the production of all of the Commonwealth Club's programming and has been doing so for 22 years.
Thank you. My pleasure.
It's an amazing record of accomplishment. By my count, at least 9,000 programs at the Commonwealth Club. And he always makes clear he didn't produce all of them.
Thank goodness.
He didn't
I
do
wouldn't be
all
able
the
to
work
walk.
himself. There's been a wonderful staff working with him on this. But I'm Gloria Duffy, the CEO of the Commonwealth Club, George's boss, and so we're humorously calling this George's exit interview. This is going to be a fun-filled discussion of what he has seen behind the scenes and all of the momentous events George has been involved in. He came to the club in 1999. 9/11 came before too long, and then of course we've just been through the big trauma of the pandemic and issues about our democracy and other things going on in our society. So welcome to George Dobbins.
Well, thank you. You know, it is hard for me to believe that it's been 22 years because it's gone. It's gone very quickly with so much. It's been a busy time and busy days and busy hours and, like you, Gloria, long hours and kind of a 24/7 job that's been exciting and exhilarating and one that I am very honored to have had. I sometimes will tell people that the Commonwealth Club was founded in 1903, and I've been here since 1905, and they'll go, good for you. That's really great. You know, what was it like booking Teddy Roosevelt? Well, but it's been a great ride and one that I will always treasure.
Well, and this is you have only 2 more days at the club. On Friday morning,
Amazing.
You will wake up, and I often find I'm an early riser, and George is always there by 7 o'clock on email and ready to go back and forth on questions of the day. So what will it be like for you to wake up on Friday?
You know, I'm not. I know this will be hard to believe, but I'm not naturally an early riser, and I normally will sleep late. So maybe I'll sleep a little later, which is my inclination. The reason I started becoming an early riser was, as you know, before I came here, I was a television talk show producer. And I did a live show. I worked at Channel 5 here in San Francisco at KPIX for 5 years on a show called People Are Talking. As a matter of fact, there is Ann Miller, the woman who hired me at Channel 5, and I'm a good friend, and I'm very delighted that she's here. And one of the things we did a 10 o'clock show, and I used to have to get to work at 7. And it wasn't my natural inclination, and I drove in from the peninsula. So I started drinking a lot of coffee, and I was up to about 6 cups a day, and I developed a twitch. I was walking around to people like, and I finally had to go to the doctor. He said, how many cups of coffee are you drinking a day? And I told him, he said, cut that out. So I'm now down to about 1 or 2. So no more twitch. And but that's what got me the early morning routine.
I'm not surprised to see your colleague from over 22 years ago here. I've found, as we announced George's retirement, the the warm wishes have come in from far and wide. Doug McConnell, the producer of Bay Area Backroads
Yeah.
and many other programs,
He used to be a colleague of ours.
sent his regards to you and has been communicating with you. So many people, just an outpouring of fondness for you. So tell us a little bit about your background before coming to the club, and how did you decide to go into the media? I know you're
Yeah.
a Bay Area native.
I am. I grew up down the peninsula in Burlingame. I was born here in San Francisco, so a native. I loved television from the very beginning when I was a child, and I always wanted to work in it. And I tell the story that when I was 13 years old, my parents took me back east and we went to New York and Washington and Philadelphia. And most people go to Philadelphia to see the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall. And my mother and I went to see the Mike Douglas Show. So, it was in my bones for a long time. I loved talk shows. I believed in television. I loved its power to entertain and to move and to inform and do all those things. So I wanted to be in it. And so I decided that I would try to do that. And I went to Stanford as an undergrad, and I was an English major, and then I went and got a master's degree in television and film production at UCLA because I thought that would lead me into the business. And of course, it still took forever to get into the business. I actually had some interviews at Channel 5 in the late 70s, but I didn't get hired there. But Ann wasn't there, so at least not that I saw. And so I didn't get hired there then. But and so I kind of postponed my plans to go into television for a while, and I went to work for a regional magazine in Palo Alto called Peninsula Magazine, and I'd done some newspaper stuff at Stanford and Peninsula. You may remember there was a show on television called WKRP in Cincinnati, and we were kind of WKRP in Palo Alto, and it was. What I didn't know was that the day I walked in there, the entire staff had walked out like 2 days before. And so I'm interviewing with the publishers, and they're telling me, that what the magazine is. And so I called them back a couple of days later, and I said, well, I'm just following up. And they said, oh, yes, you're hired. And I said, well, I thought I was going to be an editorial assistant or something like that. And I said, well, what's my title? They said, you're managing editor. And so absolutely true. And so I did that for a year. We kept it going, and it was great. It was a chance to do some writing and interviewing. I actually interviewed Willie Mays for that publication, and the problem was that the magazine kind of died right before they ran out of money to pay the publisher. So right before it was going to come out, it died. And that article I actually ended up selling to California Living in the San Francisco Chronicle. And it was Willie Mays out of uniform, and it was great. And it taught me a lot about preparation, too, because a woman who worked at the magazine knew Willie Mays' wife, and that's how I got the interview. And so personal connections, obviously, are important. And it's also good to plan because I also brought a photographer to Willie Mays' house, and I sat at his kitchen for an hour. Unfortunately, he came to the door not camera ready, shall we say. And so the photographer had to sit there the whole time while I just did the interview. So it taught me a lot about preparation and informing people and all the stuff that you do in television. So eventually, all of that led to some television. I worked in a show that actually, Ann, you steered me to it also. It was a show called World of People, one of the funny titles. It was created by the guy that created Evening Magazine. And it was supposed to be to people events what the wide world of sports was to sporting events. So we did the unveiling of the $6 million watch and all kinds of wild, different stories. And it was a great experience. And then that kind of died. And then I went to work there was a show in the 50s called You Asked For It, which some of you may remember. I'm very old, so I remember it. And You Asked For It was at the beginning of television. So people would write in and they would say, I want to see the tallest mountain in the world. I want to see the most dangerous stunt ever done. So they decided to redo it. And I got hired as a field researcher. It was a syndicated show, as I like to say, with an emphasis on the sin. But it was, I met the animal chiropractor, the blind archer, the wrestling bear, the man who invented the flying car, the man who invented the bulletproof car, and numerous others. And I'd spend a day with all of them. So it was all, that's why I'm the way I am today. And so it was, that all led to ultimately working at Channel 5 and working in talk television. And that was a great experience working. Again, we did 2 shows a day, 5 days a week with the same 2 hosts. Very successful show here in this market. Taught me a lot about persistence in booking, which I think has translated to the need in this job. 2 great moments of persistence at Channel 5 for me. One is Carl Reiner was a great booking that I really wanted, the icons of television. And I would call Carl Reiner's office once a month to try to get him. And we would bring people up. We actually had a budget to fly people up and put them up at hotels. I mean, it's amazing when you look back in the 80s what we could do. But, I kept getting no. And finally, after a year and a half, I got Carl Reiner. He came up. He was wonderful, charming. And I asked him if he'd sign me an autograph. And he wrote, "To George, you win." And that's a good moment. That's what I'm proud of. And the other moment is booking Herb Caen. And I've told this to Christopher Caen, who is his son, who is married to Melissa Caen, who does a lot of moderation for us here and is wonderful. We kept trying to book Herb Caen, the famous columnist, right, for the San Francisco Chronicle, to come on our show at Channel 5. And he kept, ignoring my calls. And finally, I was having lunch one day with a woman who was a publicist, and she said, "Oh, there's Herb Caen over there. Do you know him?" I said, "No, but I've sure been trying to." She says, "Come with me." So she takes me over to his table, and she says, "Herb, this is George Dobbins, and he's been trying to book you." And I said, "I would love to have you come to our show." And he goes, okay, I'll do it. So eventually he comes, and in the green room, he looks at me and he says, "Do you know why I agreed to do your show?" He said, "To get you off my rear end," but he didn't say rear end. So it taught me a lot about persistence and about how far is too far and how far you need to push and all that. And television was a wonderful career for me. I think I'm talking too much, but if I am, interrupt me.
Great story.
Television was just a wonderful career for me. It motivated me a lot because I got to meet some amazing people. I did spend the time at Channel 5. Then it was drying up a little bit for me after that. One of our shows got canceled because we were opposite Oprah, and that was a tough one in the afternoon, although the morning show kept going successfully. So then I freelanced and did some other things and eventually ended up spending a year in Los Angeles and worked for, when Ron Reagan Jr. had a talk show, I was a producer on that, and it was kind of a forerunner of Bill Maher, and it was great. I was always proud of the fact that we did, the first week it aired, 3 of the 5 shows were mine, and they were all praised by the Pulitzer Prize winning critic of the Los Angeles Times, Howard Rosenberg, so he praised those. And then I worked for Disney briefly down there, and that was an experience trying to do a talk show with a wonderful comedian named D.L. Hughley, who's still very popular, African-American comedian. And it just didn't quite take off in the way that we, that we had hoped. And but DL is terrific and really very talented, and I'm glad he's got a wonderful career. So that led me back up to the Bay Area. When that died, I worked for the Dr. Dean Edell show, which many of you may remember. He was a great radio host, and then he ultimately had a television show. That was very bizarre because it was an NBC television show that was taped at Channel 7, which was ABC, but aired around the country on NBC stations. And it was overseen by a woman who was in charge of soap operas, a medical show overseen by a soap operas woman, who didn't really want Dean to do what he had done on radio, which was a lot of medical stuff. So she wanted psychics and soap opera hunks and people screaming, and it was a little bit crazy. And she would also invent words that didn't exist in our meetings. So she said she liked shows that were organic. So it's very strange. And so ultimately that, led me to other television. And ultimately, television talk, as I knew it, and the kind of thing I was doing, was kind of drying up, and a lot of it was moving in the direction of technology stuff in the late 90s. And so I worked for a company called CNET, and then for one called ZDTV. CNET was great. Ryan Seacrest was also working for CNET at the time I was there, as was Ron Reagan, interestingly enough. And we did shows about the internet, which was relatively growing at that time, and about one of the first shows I had to do was the situation, as you know, with many offices now, and it was then with tech, was you had a bullpen, and you sat out in a wide group of people, and there were really no walls. So everybody could see what everybody else was doing. And the first show I had to do was a show about porn on the internet. So I'm sitting there in a bullpen, and I'm looking at all of these porn websites, and people are passing by saying, "What is his job?" And it was very strange. But ultimately, that's what happened. And ultimately, that kind of stuff all kind of dried up for me. I was booking shows with people to talk about literally, circuits and wires. And, it was kind of drying up for me. And that's when someone we both know, who was the publicity director here at the Commonwealth Club, said to me, there's an opening here. And I'd heard a lot about the Commonwealth Club and a lot about how wonderful it was. And over the years, I'd also tried to book some of the speakers that were appearing at the Commonwealth Club for my television stuff. And so I came, I interviewed with you, and went through a whole process, and the rest is history. And good night, everybody. No, but that's it.
So this is just skimming the surface of all the stories that George has and why we're going to miss his wit. And it so infrequently has come out. You're so behind the scenes facilitating other people. So it's wonderful to hear your story.
Thanks.
I want to roll back just a bit. You talked about your interview with Willie Mays. I believe that you also managed the football team while you were a student at Stanford.
Right. That was good preparation for things too. I was a football manager, a varsity football manager at Stanford, which I actually started doing that because I started doing it in high school because frankly it got me out of regular PE, which was not one of my great skills. And so my grade went from C to A in PE in high school. It was great for the transcript, but it was actually a lot of fun. I met a lot of people that I would never have met otherwise and became friends with them. So I continued doing it at Stanford. And at Stanford, my freshman year, the team went to the Rose Bowl. They'd actually gone to the Rose Bowl the year before with Jim Plunkett, and they went again with a guy named Don Bunce. And there was a wonderful freshman coach, Coach Moultrie, who at that time there's a freshman team. Now they combine them. And he was just great. And he used to call me Dobbin, and he didn't quite get my name right, but he knew who I was. And he had great philosophy. We used to have to carry these big blocking dummies to different parts of the field and get them set up for the team to practice. And one day he said, Dobbin, I want you to take 4 blocking dummies and put them over that side of the field. And I said, Coach, we only have 3. And he said, well, do what it takes to get the job done. And that was good preparation for all of this. And so, it was just a little crazy. The other thing we had to do, which was probably very good for teaching humility, was at that time, you see the players on the sidelines now, and they all drink water out of Gatorade, containers, and it looks very pristine and clean. But when we were there, they had these big mechanical jugs, literally, that had these hoses coming out from them and a pump on top. And one of our jobs as the manager was to stand there and keep the water pressure up while they all stood around you. And, you couldn't breathe too deeply. But it was quite a test of humility and all that. But again, I made a lot of friends. I worked with the defensive backs. The coach at the time was a gentleman named George Seifert, who you may know later became the coach of the 49ers. And one of my scary moments always was that on the sidelines before the game, he used to warm up his hand to do drills with the players, and he used to make me play catch with him. So that was always a little bit scary because you didn't want to look too, clumsy. But it was always great. And that was really good preparation, I think, in many cases for, again, dealing with all the stuff that comes at us that's unpredictable.
Many teams and a few dummies.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes me. And I got to travel too. I went to Penn State and Hawaii and Michigan and, all kinds of places. It was great.
So tell us a little bit about working in the Disney organization, and then we'll roll forward to the Commonwealth Club.
Well, I should yield to my friend Dan, who's an expert on that. Disney was very interesting in the sense that Disney had more lawyers and accountants than creative people, actually, which is kind of very telling, at least in the early 90s when I was there. And it was for a short period of time. But there was a wonderful gentleman, and he knows I'm a fan of his, Bruno Cohn, who was the news director at Channel 5 and then became a development executive at Disney and brought me in to work on the DL Hughley program. And Bruno was very funny. Also, he could be a combination of funny and intimidating and all of the above, but he was just a wonderful guy. And Bruno used to call these creative meetings, and he would make the accountants come to the meetings too. And one day, one of the accountants was saying to Bruno, I'm an accountant. Why do I have to come to these meetings? The guy's name was Andy, and Bruno looked at him and said, Andy? And that's kind of how he talked. He said, it's time you not only learned how to count beans, but to plant them. And so Bruno had great lines. The one thing with Disney was that we did what was called, we used to have to do run-throughs before we did an actual show. So we did a run-through of the first D.L. Hughley show, and a couple of them actually. And they were very particular about who they wanted. Back in the 90s, they had people like Ashley Judd and Janine Garofalo, who you may know, comedian, actress, who were part of the run-throughs because they didn't think they were quite ready to be part of the actual show. But we did these run-throughs and all that, and the executives at Disney were very challenging, and they were very finicky about their views. One executive actually said what I thought was the most arrogant thing I've ever heard in my life, when he looked at me and looked at us and said, with kind of a thick New York accent, "Remember, I am the mirror that does not distort." And I thought, boy, that's pretty heady. But eventually we got the show on the air. We did only we were supposed to do 6, and I think we did 5, and it was an experience. But it was really quite an experience working in the corporate. There was a picture of Walt Disney over the men's room. As you go in, and it was kind of looking down at you like, why are you wasting my time? And then we did hear these stories about Walt Disney that there was an apocryphal story, maybe it's true, that he used to go into executive offices late at night and check the waste paper baskets of all the employees. And if if there was too much in there, it meant they would get demerits because they were wasting company time. And so the story is that the employees used to carry home little bags of garbage every night, to avoid being caught. So it was quite an experience.
Well, so after all this movement from place to place in the media, you settled in at the Commonwealth Club.
I did. And, I had to learn because I was used to doing television with live audiences, but I wasn't used to doing live events with live audiences. That was a whole new thing about, which venue and how do you do it and all that. And it was a learning process for me, and it was a really good one. And when I came in the first week, the speakers were the President of Mexico and Dan Quayle. That was the first week I was here. And the first bookings that I did were Jack Valenti, who you may remember was the press assistant to Lyndon Johnson and also the head of the Motion Picture Association of America. And at that time in 1999, people were very concerned about violence in movies and all that. And so we booked Jack Valenti to come talk about that. And, he was great. I remember being new, we used to ask, and at the time, now we have conversations, but at the time, it was a speech and Q&A was more the format. And people now have evolved to wanting more of the conversation. But we used to ask to send a copy of the speech in advance. And we got a copy of his speech, and it was like 2 pages long. And we thought it was supposed to be a half-an-hour speech. Of course, what we knew was that Jack Valenti would fill the time, and he did. And it was great. The other one that I booked that I'm really proud of to this day, and I see a photo here, by the way. I think I'm going to start with this photo before I talk about the other one. When I started here at the Commonwealth Club, Gloria, you handed me this postcard. This is a postcard from a 1911 dinner with Teddy Roosevelt. No, I wasn't there. But Gloria handed me this card, and she said, this is the image a lot of people have of the Commonwealth Club, that it's all white men, that it's a very conservative organization, and this is the image we are trying to change. Because the Commonwealth Club is a nonpartisan organization, open to all. It is an organization that has a wide range of views and a wide range of speakers, and so this is what we try to change. We're not as narrow as a lot of people, and I think we have. And to the credit of an entire staff of people over the years that have been so talented, that image has changed, and we have booked a wide range of people, a wide range of from different communities and different perspectives, and I think that's changed.
We still keep this around as a reminder that
It's
we
great.
can always do better.
It's great, and you know, it's a good reminder to me, and I still have my copy of it. But the other program I was going to say that one of the first ones I booked was Marcel Marceau. And I think we have a photograph of that somewhere. I don't know, Mark, do we? Well, somewhere we do.
It'll come
The-
up eventually.
He, of course, was the famous
go.
mime. Yes, that was one of the first ones I booked. See how much younger I look? That was one of the first ones
He certainly
that I
looks younger,
booked.
too.
He was. And you know, I had booked him in television, and I knew he was a great talker. And so we called it Marcel Marceau Speaks, which was a great title. And he came, and you know, we knew that he was fascinating. He, unfortunately, when he showed up, he didn't know a lot about the Commonwealth Club, and he saw us, you know, selling tickets at the front desk. He goes, "Why are you selling tickets to my event?" You know, even though we thought that this had all been explained, but not necessarily. So we explained that we're a nonpartisan organization, nonprofit. This is how we pay the bills. We rent our space, all that. And so he said, okay. So we take him backstage, and then he says to me, and this is why my philosophy of booking, as you know, is that there's no such thing as an easy booking. And as Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over. And this is the proof of that. So he's backstage. We're about to go out, and he looks at me and he goes, "All right, I will not talk about my personal life, and I will not do any demonstrations." This is the famous mime who won't talk and won't show anything, right? And I said, well, let's give it a little bit of time and see what happens, you know, out there. I think you'll be comfortable when you go out. It was a sold-out house. It was in our original 595 Market Street building. So the great part was he did go out, and he did talk about himself, and he did do demonstrations. And what we learned was that during the World War II, he was in the French Resistance, and he was a forger. And there's also a movie that's been done recently, I think, about him doing, you know, in that role.
Forged passports for Jewish,
Yes,
I believe.
and he is Jewish, or was Jewish. And so it was all done, and everybody found it magnificent, and he was just charming and wonderful. And then at the end, he said, "Next time I want 2 hours." And unfortunately, he passed away a few years later. We never got that. But that's an example of you never know what's going to happen, and you just have to do your best to go with the flow and try to talk to people in a way that's respectful and hopefully shows them what you're about.
Before you have somebody up on the stage, there's, of course, a whole process that goes on to entice them to appear. And you talked about how you did that during your media career. But in a case like Marcel Marceau or others, how did you reach out to him? How did you convince him?
Well, my wife and I were reading the newspaper one morning, and we saw that he was in town. And we thought, and that's, in those days, you know, there wasn't a lot of the internet and all that. So we thought, yeah, there he is. He's coming to town. Let me call. And so I did call. And you try to say, obviously, the phrase that we always used to use in television is, what horse do they have to ride? And so you try to find that always. You try to find what is the motivation for them coming here. Obviously, the great motivation that we have here at the Commonwealth Club, which is great, is that it's a prestigious organization. It's an organization that treats people respectfully. It is an organization that has a great radio program that's been around since 1924, is it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, longest running, continuous one. It has just a lot of qualities in addition to press coverage and coverage promotion for whatever they're in town to do. So I think we can sell that. It is true, though, that these days the landscape has evolved, as we often discuss, and there are so many more organizations in the business of doing public events. And I think we have still a lot to sell. But the Commonwealth Club, a lot of people don't know, does not pay speakers. We never have, and we really operate on the basis of trying to sell what we do to the speaker in terms of what they will get out of an appearance here. And there's a lot of bang for a little bit of buck. So that's what we do.
Why do you think what the Commonwealth Club does is important? To devote 22 years of your life to this,
Yeah.
to move from a career in the media?
Yeah.
What went on in your mind to make the decision to come to the club and stay for this
Yeah.
period?
The range of people that come here, the range of ideas, thank you so much. The range of ideas that are discussed, on the stage. I mean, just the range of people that you can see here. This is one of my favorite pictures of me with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, because it's the only time in history when I'll be perceived to be taller than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, as you'll notice. And that's because he's sitting down and I'm standing up. So, but the range of people that you see,
You don't look taller than our.
he's not as tall as Kareem, but it was great. And he came to us before he was governor, when he was wanting to advocate for after-school programs for youth. And it was a great appearance as a result. You can just see, this is Annie Leibovitz, the great photographer. And one of the great things about her is that she would, before it was fashionable, she was grabbing people's cameras when they wanted to take a picture of her and doing selfies so they could say that they had a photograph by Annie Leibovitz.
Did she do that? Was she doing
No, that was, somebody else took that one. So this one isn't, this was one toward the end. But she was just great. This is another one of we talk about the range of events. Governor Jerry Brown and Gus Brown, his wife, this was the night we did two major events at the Marines Memorial Theater, where we had the Browns in one on the main stage, big stage, and then in another big room, we also had Pete Buttigieg. So all at the same night, and they all wanted to meet each other, and it was a little bit of a circus, but it was really great. And this was right after Governor Brown had left office. And he and his wife had a wonderful appearance. And I think and you interviewed them, and I think the great statement she made, which I think he found amusing also, is that there are times that he still thinks he's governor. But she said that on the stage. But he's really a wonderful guy. He's engaged in so many things, as Gloria knows. And over the years, he's very much engaged in dialogue with Russia. He's engaged on the international stage. He's engaged, obviously, in climate issues. Just so many things. This is another wonderful, rare moment that I treasure. We did a program with Maria Shriver, who was interviewed by Jennifer Granholm, who's currently the Secretary of Energy, who was then the former governor of Michigan and at the University of California at Berkeley. Of course, George Shultz and Charlotte Shultz, the late George Shultz, just a wonderful icon and been so supportive to the club. And Maria Shriver, of course. And just such a treasure to have that assortment of people. And that's what we're about in so many cases, is that to have that sort of pairing and conglomeration of people that you don't get everywhere. And I think that's a rare moment. And this is a real moment that I treasure, just having had it a few years ago. Let's see what else we have. Well, to get the Speaker of the House with the frequency that we've had her has been quite something over the years. And, she's been an amazing person to keep inviting back. And it's been great to be able to do that, to participate in that and in those bookings. Well, this is another great moment for me. Yes, I can do it, I think. There it is. Live long and prosper. George Takei is wonderful. And, over the years, we've done a couple of things with him. This was a program a couple of years ago we did by himself, where he talked about his internment in the Japanese American camps, and he talked, and he's written his musical related to that, and just so many things political. He's really an amazing guy for all that he's experienced. And the other program he did with us, and this is the other thing, we talk about the moving programs that we've done. There was a program about 7 years ago on the anniversary of the Prop 8 Supreme Court decision on marriage equality. And we did a program with the two lawyers who made that decision a success, David Boies and Ted Olson, one Republican, one Democrat, interestingly enough, because this was a human issue. And we invited George Takei to do the introduction, and we invited, at the time, Lieutenant Governor Newsom to moderate. And that's what we did. And to me, that's one of the most moving programs I've ever experienced. And it was moving having George Takei. It was great getting to write for him, by the way. And I did write an introduction for him. But it was also moving having Gavin Newsom moderate when he asked the two lawyers, what got you motivated to do this? And they looked at him and they said, you did. You know, that was a moving moment for me to hear that. It was a human moment. And those are the great moments. But George Takei is a great man. Well, this is probably my greatest moment of tenacity, I guess you can say. Booking Jimmy Carter. He's one of the few presidents that had never spoken at the Commonwealth Club. And it took us 13 years to get him. And we had a lot of help. And, you know, as Gloria knows, one of my metaphors, in addition to, I have two metaphors. One is plate spinning, you know, like the old plate spinners from the Ed Sullivan Show, that metaphorically that's what we do. We spin the new ones and we try to keep the old ones from crashing and keep all of them in the air. And the other thing we do is we dig tunnels. And we dig metaphorical tunnels. And sometimes there's a lot of dirt and sometimes there isn't. But when there's a lot of dirt, you have to go at it from many different angles. And we did that with Jimmy Carter. We had a number of people, several people that knew him, two of our board members that were involved in the Carter Center. We also had other ways. I mean, over the years, I tried every which way. We had Rosalind Carter speak a couple of times at the club, and we still hadn't been able to get President Carter. And he even, in our old building, which was on Market Street, there was an independent bookstore, Stacy's, which sadly is no longer there, but they were wonderful. He was literally signing books one day next door to us. So I stood in line, and I bought a book, and I said, oh, we're at the Commonwealth Club. We'd love to. And he goes, great organization. Of course, then the Secret Service kind of said, okay. But we tried all these different, you know, methodologies, and finally we were able to get him. They called up one day, and they said, okay, it's the Sunday of the Academy Awards. Can you do them? And I said, you bet. So it was the Sunday it was actually the day that Argo, the film, was nominated, which of course has Jimmy Carter featured in it. But we did a noon program with him. He literally flew in from San Diego, did a noon program with us, and flew out back to Georgia right after that. And he was great. He gave a great talk about foreign policy, and just so thoughtful, and also he was just so lovely, just really a nice human being. And what I remember is, and this is my personal favorite moment of all, is when he was done, I was the last person he talked to going out the door, and he looked at me and he said, I loved it. And I never forgot that and never will. So it's a good story.
Tell just a little more about how you dug the tunnel, because the Commonwealth Club is a very wide network, and we use all of our opportunities to convince people to join us.
Well, you have to. In other words, I think it's really important in bookings to try to use people or get to people that know the people you want. The personal connections are often really important, I think. And so I tried to utilize those, and that's what ultimately happened. And what we realized was that it wasn't President Carter didn't. We thought for a while, oh, does he think we're, you know, elitist or something that, you know? And it wasn't that. It was that he's so busy. It was that he was, you know, building houses for people with, you know, Habitat for Humanity, and he was going to Africa to erase guinea worm, and he was doing all these actual things that he took his time, and so he didn't have time to give speeches or make appearances. But that's why we just kept pressing, and we made all the inroads we could through, the official channels and then the personal channels, and ultimately it finally, after 13 years, it finally happened. But it was really great, and it was really everything we'd hoped for, I think. And we had 1,000 people at Herbst Theater. So that's pretty good on a Sunday. So it was great. And sometimes you never know how you're going to, you know, get speakers, as we've talked about. You get people approach you with, you know, different things, and you have to follow those leads. Maybe 20 years ago, I was sitting in my office one day, and I got a call from a person who said, how would you like to book Newt Gingrich? And again, that's what we do. We book all views. And it was right after Newt Gingrich had been Speaker of the House, and he was out on the speaking circuit and was charging some money, and he was a private citizen. And I said, of course, absolutely. And this person was in our building and had an office and a business-related education. And he said, well, he's a friend of mine. He's coming here in about a month. Would you like to meet him? And I said, sure. And of course, you're thinking in your head, is this really going to happen? But you say, absolutely. And so, sure enough, he called me. He said, next week's Newt's going to be here. Would you like to come up? And I said, absolutely. So, in a very surreal way, I did. I went up to this gentleman's office, and I sat around a table with Newt Gingrich, this gentleman, Newt Gingrich's assistant, and me. And we talked about appearing at the Commonwealth Club, and I said, we don't pay. And he said, I understand. And we ended up booking 2 programs with him, one in San Francisco and one in Silicon Valley. And again, you never know from whence it comes.
Speaking of Silicon Valley, I'll never forget the program with George W. Bush.
Yeah.
Just at the time the Iraq War was being launched. That must have been an amazing one to manage.
Well, and that also was, came about through some personal connections that you had with Secretary Rice, who you know very well, who was obviously in the administration, and I think helped put some good words for us. And it's always, I think it's the most intense and among the most exciting things to book a sitting president. That's the only sitting president I've ever actually booked. And it came about one day when I got a call on a Friday and from a gentleman who was a fundraiser involved with the president and said, well, would you like to do a program with him? And of course I said, of course, absolutely. He said, well, it may be very short notice. I said, that's okay. And the following Sunday night at home, I get a call from him and he says, how about a week from Tuesday? I said, absolutely. And so with the help from a lot of staff people and others, we made it happen. And we did a program. It was at 10:30 in the morning. It was less than 6 months after 9/11. It was with 1,500 people at the San Jose Convention Center. And the moment I also remember is that, it's very surreal. Sometimes I've told Gloria this and I've told others that there's a Woody Allen movie called Zelig. And you may remember the premise of it is that Zelig is a character who finds himself surrounded by famous people throughout different periods in history. And sometimes I feel like Zelig, and I did it this time too, because you're witnessing all of this. And, I'm backstage and Gloria was introducing the program and also moderated a few questions afterwards, after he was done giving a speech. So we have a few of our board members come in to greet him and they leave. And Gloria goes out to introduce the president, and I'm backstage just with him alone. And I never forgot the fact that I'm standing there and he has no idea who I am, except that the Secret Service has an idea who I am. And he came over to me and offered his hand and shook my hand, and I never forgot it. And I always thought that tells you a lot about a human being, because he didn't have to do that. And so that was a lot. And it was very intense. We used to go to these night meetings, as they called them, every night, where they'd talk about the progression of Air Force One wheels down to Air Force One wheels up and all the things that were going to happen. And they would point at me and say, and you're responsible for making sure nobody gets in without a ticket. I said, sure, absolutely. And, I had some very good help. And there's Cara, who still works in our Silicon Valley office, helped a lot with the ticketing and all of that. It was a big help. So but it's a very intense situation, but it's a very exciting one, and I've never forgotten it. Probably the most intense program ever.
Speaking of high-level officials, someone in our audience wants to know, can you tell the Al Gore elevator story from the elevator?
It's a great story, and you were part of it.
Okay.
In 2002, we did a program with Al Gore, and it was at the Fairmont. It was obviously less than a couple years after the controversial election, right? And it was at the Fairmont, and I think we had a room of over 500 people for a noon program. It was and you and I went up to meet him and Tipper at the time to ride down in the elevator with them. And as we're riding down in the elevator, he says to us, "This is a historic day." And we thought, okay, yeah. Well, we went and looked it up later, and we discovered that it was indeed 70 years to the day of FDR's New Deal speech, perhaps the most famous speech ever given at the Commonwealth Club. And he knew it. And that tells you a lot about Al Gore. So, a pretty good moment.
other stories? Any other behind the scenes stories you'd like to share?
Well, there are just some, there have been some great moments just with speakers. Yeah. Jesse Jackson is another one who's an icon, and obviously just been amazing that we had him. We did a series called the Medallion Awards, where we, in honor of the club's centennial, we gave a number of people awards for having positively shaped our era. I think that was the phrase. And he was one. And as a matter of fact, we had a reception as well for all of those people that were part of the Medallion Awards. And I do remember that this was a little later, this was just a few years ago, and Reverend Jackson is still amazing and still so active in so many things. And again, just a great icon of our time. But what I also remember is that when we gave him the Medallion Award, we were taking pictures out on the balcony, and he said, "Would you like to take one with me?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he also produced the picture because he had me take off my name badge, which I never would have thought of doing. He said, "It looks better that way." So I never forgot that. Pretty considerate. Yeah. The other medallion moment that comes to mind, and perhaps one of the funniest moments that I remember, Ted Turner. And Gloria remembers it well. And Ted Turner was a character, and is always one of the great American characters, as you know. And we were doing a program with him, and we were going to give him an award, again, the same way we did with Reverend Jackson. And he was getting a little antsy of the program, and he kind of wanted to cut it short. It was an hour program, and he kind of, with 10 minutes to go. So he literally burst out. He said, "You know, I flew myself here. I spent $50,000 on my plane to get myself here." He goes, "Give me my award and let me go home." and then he said, "I'm not getting paid for this." And the moderator was a wonderful woman who was the executive editor of the Chronicle, Narda Zacchino. And she looked at him and said, "Well, neither am I." And he said, "All right then." And he stuck around. And then he came back a couple of years later for another interview related to a book he'd written. And again, you never know. He's that's what makes a great guest. You never know what's going to come out of his mouth. And he was being interviewed by Phil Bronstein, the journalist. And at one point, he just turned to Phil on the stage and he goes, "Want to hear me sing?" And he sang "My Old Kentucky Home" beautifully, like right on key, stunning. Just a great moment. And you just never know. Those are the moments that you never expect, you never know, but they're great moments.
I think you have a Walter Cronkite story too.
Well, yeah, I think maybe we have a photo of that. Let's see if we, well, maybe not. Okay. Walter Cronkite, of course, was an icon for so many of us for so many years. There it is. Thank you, Mark. And he was just the man who told us that President Kennedy had been killed, the man who covered the moon landing. I mean, just so much history that so many people had with Walter Cronkite, including me. And as somebody who'd been in broadcasting, it was really a great thrill to get to book him. And we did. He also got one of our Medallion Awards. And I had to go up to his hotel suite. We were going to bring him down for the program. And I knocked on the door. And his wife came to the door and answered the door. And she was lovely and very gracious. And I look across the room, and there's Walter Cronkite sitting in a chair reading the newspaper, telling me, "I'm just catching up on the day's events." And I thought, well, God, is that a sight to see Walter Cronkite catching up on the day's events? And I said, well, let me give you a few more minutes. And of course, I went away, and then I came back in 10 minutes, and they opened the door again. He said, well, I told you I didn't think you had to leave. So he was just really gracious and funny and lovely. And of course, when sometimes you ask speakers if there are any requests that they have. And for Walter Cronkite, there was just a very simple phrase that came back: Johnny Walker Black. And he was charming and wonderful to everybody, and it was a great moment. There are a few other great moments, too. I don't know if we have the picture of Carol Channing, but, this is a great moment. With the late Ellen Tauscher, who was on our board, and just a wonderful, amazing human being. On International Women's Day, we did a program with Madeleine Albright and her amazing daughter, Katie, who heads an organization to fight child abuse called Safe and Sound. And the two of them together with Ellen it was just a wonderful program about all the great work they do, but just, it was so human and so touching, and it just was a memorable, wonderful moment that I'll never forget. So that's a great moment. Here's another great moment early on. The great Carol Channing, who was amazing. And we did a program with Carol Channing at the Fairmont Hotel. And in the last 10 minutes of the program, we were in the Venetian room. The laundry room at the Fairmont Hotel is apparently right beneath the Venetian room. Because in about 10 minutes to go in the end of the program, the late and great Ray Taliaferro, who was a member of our board and had a great voice that I could never begin to mimic, starts telling us, "You'll all have to leave. There's a fire below in the laundry room and we'll have to clear the building." And that was true.
Wow.
So we had to exit the building, evacuate, and God love Carol Channing, who suffered from arthritis. She's out on the front of the Fairmont balcony in a cold winter's night signing books for people. And I never forgot it.
Wow.
And that's a trooper. So there's another great moment. Here's another great moment. Many of us who grew up in the 60s or were around then remember Richard Chamberlain, who was, of course, Dr. Kildare and later in the Thornbirds and many other things. And someone came to me and said, "Might you be interested in having Richard Chamberlain speak?" And I said, absolutely. It'd been many years since people had seen him. But what was wonderful was when he walked into the room, people gasped. It was like seeing an iconic movie star that they hadn't seen, or television star that they hadn't seen in a long time. And I remember when I talked to him on the phone, he was a lovely man. He said, "Do you think I really can fill an hour?" And I said, "You bet." And it was a charming, wonderful evening in conversation with the lovely Mary Bitterman, who is the former head of KQED and now with the Osher Foundation, who's on our board. And it was a wonderful program. So another great moment. And he was great. Well, there's another great moment. Francis Ford Coppola. And just someone that we'd wanted for a long time. And someone that, I think when he showed up, he wasn't aware of the size of the crowd we had. It was at the Castro Theater. I think he might have thought we were going to have a little bit smaller crowd. We had 1,500 people. And I think he thought, and somehow in his head, it was going to be a smaller crowd. But he'd written a book about The Godfather, called The Godfather Notebook, and it was sort of his production notes on the making of The Godfather, and it was fabulous, and it's a great book. And he was great. And finally, he came out, and you can still view this program on the Commonwealth Club's website or on YouTube. He impersonated Marlon Brando. He impersonated Al Pacino. He told amazing stories about the whole production of The Godfather. And when it was all done, he did 3 opera bows to the audience, center, right, and left. And I never forgot it. So, great moment. There's the great Cornel West, Dr. Cornel West, one of the great African-American scholars and activists, and just wonderful energy with a wonderful woman named Cheryl Davis, who's the head of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, and just a wonderful program. Again, very inspiring, uplifting, and again, illustrating the range of programs that we do. Let me see here. That's one of the early on programs. We did a number of programs with Bruce Bochy, who was the coach of the San Francisco Giants manager. And Roy Eisenhart, who was on our book jury, head of our book jury, and so active in the club, supporting many of our programs, interviewed him. But what was interesting about Bruce Bochy is I always used to see him in the dugout, and I didn't think he was very tall. And then he showed up, and he is a giant. So, and a lovely man, and a wonderful man who's done many programs with us, and just a great memory. I know time's ticking. The great John Glenn, also an icon. To do iconic figures like that is great. And we've done a number of astronauts over the years, but he's certainly one of the most iconic. One of the other moving moments we did was with Sally Ride, who was a wonderful, iconic figure and such a role model for so many young women, young girls in school. And we filled the room with young students, young women, young girl students with her. And it was a very wonderful evening that we had with her as well. So,
George, We are getting towards the end of our
I'm probably talking too much.
Sadly, you
and I
are not
apologize.
talking too much. I'm just absolutely thrilled by the stories, most of which I've never heard. I sort of saw how it all came out. I didn't see what went into making it come out that way. We started at the beginning with that picture of the Teddy Roosevelt dinner in 1911, which, by the way, was momentous. Teddy Roosevelt he coined the term conservation at that talk that he gave. It was actually, he was talking about the timber barons and how they would be better off for their businesses if they metered out how they took the timber from forests and let the forest continue to grow rather than cutting it all and clear cutting it. So it was a very foresightful talk in 1911. But we talked when you first arrived about how that was both the image and we were trying to change the reality of the club. How has the conversation changed? How have the people on the club stage changed in the 22 years that you've been here?
Well, I think the range of people has grown enormously, as have the issues that we're confronted with. I think we have found ourselves in obviously in a pandemic, that we never thought we'd find ourselves in, I think. And it's changed, obviously, the way people are coming to the club now. We have speakers and viewers from all over the world that we thought we'd never have. Just when I would be sitting at home, managing some of these programs, I had amazing people just in my living room there. I mean, just amazing people, whether it's Prince Edward or, Ken Follett, the author, or other people coming from all over the world. You just never know. And I think with the pandemic, with the issues of gender and racial equality that we're being confronted with these days and seeing so much of, I think we are booking, a wider range, and this, goes to the staff doing so as well. A wider range of people than we've ever seen, and I think trying to send the message that we are, an organization that wants to hear wide viewpoints. We want to hear people that have substantial things to say, substance. We ideally want to hear people that are based in reality, that understand, what facts are. It's one thing to argue over policy, and it's another thing to argue over facts. But I think we really are trying to cover a range of important issues that people are grappling with in their daily lives and try to present perspectives to people to make them think and act in ways they feel they should. But that's what I hope we're doing. That's what I hope the role of the club continues to be.
I think we've moved a long way since the echoes of that 1911 photo. And I really am grateful to you and the staff members who work with you for making sure that it's a platform that represents equity, justice, diversity, and the values that we want and hope to see in our society. So thank you for what you've done to make that happen, and to your colleagues who work with you on that.
Thanks. Well, thanks to the audience for coming to our programs and supporting us and understanding that that you don't have to agree with everybody that's on the stage, but that this is an organization that presents a civil platform for discussion and thoughtfulness about these issues, and that hopefully you will take that platform and think about your own views and take what you can from that.
So, George, we're going to miss you every day in every way. Thanks to Rosie, your lovely wife, for putting up with all of us.
I'm lucky she puts up with me.
And for sharing, George, so many hours of every day with the club, sort of in the style of Walter Cronkite or one of your other media colleagues. How do you sum it all up?
Well, that's the way it is.
Any other final words of summation?
Well, it's just been a real privilege to be able to do this and to be able, booking is my life. I mean, I guess that's the answer. And it's just been a privilege to be able to keep doing that and to learn. I'm somebody who is make no bones about the fact that I'm somebody who enjoys meeting a variety of people and am fascinated by people in the public eye and to see what they're really like and to learn what they really have to say. And that's been the privilege I've had.
Well, thank you for sharing that passion with all of us for so many years, and thank you for all you've done.
Thanks, Gloria.
So grateful.
Well, as the old phrase goes, I'll be around the corner.
All right, we'll count on that.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks to our audience here in San Francisco. Thanks to our audience online. And now this program of the Commonwealth Club has come to an end.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful conversation. I hope I didn't say too much.
No, it